this is a slide for the cover sheet. I was told it doesn't count towards the overall time for the presentation to include this sheet. So I'm actually going to stay here a few extra seconds to make sure that you get the information down. I wasn't sure if you either needed to screenshot or maybe pause the video and get the info. I'm about to move on to the presentation, so if you need that information, I would get it now. Okay, so my poster was on conservation science and what is the role of conservation scientists in heritage science? So the question was, what kind of benefits and challenges would the inclusion of a conservation scientist bring to a conservation project? While conservation science has traditionally been difficult to define as a field, it does have a well-established basis in the scientific method. As a field, it combines the need to preserve physical objects by applying diverse scientific knowledge while promoting the cultural and social values of these objects. So when you include a conservation scientist on conservation projects, there are definitely several advantages and disadvantages to consider. I'm going to quickly go over some of the definitions of terms I used on my poster. The first being conservation science. While I did say it was hard to define, generally it is the interdisciplinary study of conservation of cultural objects through the use of scientific practice and inquiry. Heritage science is a more recent umbrella term that conservation science falls under that describes works of scientific study in cultural objects to enhance, preserve, and understand these items now and for the future. And conservation scientists, like the field they work in, can also be difficult to define, but generally they are a type of conservator who focuses on research of cultural objects by applying scientific research and inquiry techniques. So what are some of the advantages of including a conservation scientist on a project? Well, they include the varied scientific and cultural expertise, the ability to assess and develop new conservation methods, their interdisciplinary approaches, the ability to use a variety of scientific equipment, and the application of the scientific method to diagnose and prevent the degradation of cultural objects. There are definitely some disadvantages, of course, and those would include the lack of cross-disciplinary training, the lack of effective communication, the lack of continuity and knowledge buildup, simplification, sample invasive or destructive techniques, inherent bias, and the separation of scientific and cultural disciplines. So according to the ICROM Form of Conservation Science Convention 2013 background survey, communication between conservators and scientists is generally good. However, the same survey indicates that collaboration between these two fields still warrants closer examination. And overall, interdisciplinary communication and literacy are two of the main issues for conservation scientists. Because there is a lack of cross-disciplinary training and no formalized educational background necessary for this role, conservation scientists can come from a variety of different backgrounds. This can be a good thing, as an interdisciplinary approach is great when approaching a conservation project, but it can also hinder conservation efforts. Mainly, it can potentially limit new techniques and testing, and conservation scientists could potentially focus largely on the scientific aspects of the project without taking into account their cultural duty as a conservator to the object. So here I'm focusing on two questions from that ICROM survey. One is describe where the scientists you have contacted for advice work, and the other is how effectively did you work together with scientists as a team? As you can see, both of these data points are overall pretty positive. The first being that the scientists that conservation scientists do contact largely already work in academic or heritage settings. And communication between scientists and conservators is also pretty good, according to the survey. However, the 2013 convention still concluded that a lack of communication and cross-disciplinary training are two major issues in the field. So while the trends seem to be positive, work still needs to be done. So the inclusion of a conservation scientist in a conservation project is generally necessary, but not without its fault. Currently, conservation scientists have no formalized educational background, which can be useful as interdisciplinary approaches are often necessary for conservation projects, as I previously stated, but this also means that there's a potential lack of scientific literacy and overall communication. At the same time, as traditionally scientific field, this could also mean conservation scientists potentially lack the same socio-cultural responsibility other conservators would have. Overall, the main takeaway is the data indicates the field is trending towards a more formalized yet flexible and multidisciplinary education route. And communication between science and conservation as field is getting better, which means conservation scientists can start being the bridge between the humanistic and scientific fields they already seem to be. For the literature review, I split my sources into three different groups. The first is background information that just provided me historical and contextual background information on conservation and conservation science. The second is scholarly interpretation, which was the academic analysis of conservation science as a field and critiques and proposals for improvement. And the last was data and surveys, which was hard data from background information like that 2013 survey specific to the initial question. And this is my bibliography. If you do have any other questions for me, definitely let me know. And thank you very much.